At 11:47 p.m. on September 3, 1940, a small fishing boat cut its engine 200 yards off the coast of Dungeness, Kent. The moon was dark. The English Channel waters were calm. A single passenger climbed over the gunwale into the cold water, wearing civilian clothes with a waterproof pack strapped to his back. His name was Hans Friedrich Weber, 32 years old, Abwehr intelligence officer, trained at the Hamburg spy school for 6 months, fluent in English with a slight Yorkshire accent he'd practiced for 8 weeks. The boat's engine restarted. By the time Weber reached the pebble beach, the vessel was already disappearing into the darkness. He crouched in the shadow of a seawall and listened. Wind through beach grass. Distant sound of waves. Nothing else. No patrol boats. No sentries. The British coastline was supposed to be impenetrable. Intelligence said otherwise. Weber unstrapped his pack. Inside, false identity papers identifying him as William Harris, traveling salesman from Leeds. British currency totaling £350. A wireless transmitter disguised as a portable radio. A revolver with 20 rounds of ammunition. A list of strategic targets in southern England memorized and burned in Hamburg before departure. 3 cyanide capsules sewn into his jacket lining. He buried the waterproof pack in the shingle, marked the location with 3 stones arranged in a triangle, and walked inland toward the road. His mission was straightforward. Establish residence in a coastal town. Identify Royal Air Force airfields, observe aircraft movements, report bomber squadron locations via wireless transmission to Hamburg every 48 hours. Expected duration, 6 months. The invasion of Britain would follow. Weber knew the statistics. Since May 1940, the Abwehr had inserted 42 agents into England. Only 16 were still transmitting. The British Counterintelligence Service, MI5, was better than German intelligence had estimated. Captured agents disappeared. Some were turned. Others were executed at the Tower of London or Wandsworth Prison. Weber did not intend to join them. On September 4, 1940, Weber walked 7 miles inland to the village of Ashford. He checked into a boarding house on Station Road, paid for 1 week in advance, told the landlady he was visiting relatives in the area. The room was small. Single bed, wash basin, view of the street below. He unpacked carefully, checked his identity papers again, rehearsed his cover story. William Harris. Born Leeds 1908. Father a wool merchant. Educated at Leeds Grammar School. Employed by Thompson & Sons Industrial Supplies, covering Southeast England territory. No wife. No children. Lived alone in a flat on Woodhouse Lane. The details were precise. The Abwehr had built the identity from records of a real William Harris who died in childhood, erasing any possibility of contradiction. The next morning, Weber walked through Ashford observing military activity. Troop trucks on the main roads. RAF vehicles near the railway station. A home guard checkpoint at the edge of town. He noted everything. Memorized vehicle markings and unit insignia. But he did not transmit. Too soon. Too dangerous. He needed to blend in first. Become part of the landscape. Invisible. On September 7, 1940, the Luftwaffe began the London Blitz. Weber heard the bombers overhead that night, waves of Heinkel and Dornier aircraft flying north toward the capital. From his window he watched searchlight beams sweep the sky. Distant explosions rumbled across the Kent countryside. Anti-aircraft fire lit the horizon orange and red. The next day refugees from London began arriving in Ashford. Families with suitcases and children. Elderly people displaced from bombed neighborhoods. The town's infrastructure strained under the influx. Local authorities established emergency shelters in church halls and school buildings. Weber volunteered to help. It was perfect cover. A patriotic citizen doing his duty. On September 10, at a makeshift shelter in St. Mary's Church Hall, Weber met Sarah Morrison. She was 28 years old, a nurse with the Queen Alexandra's Imperial Military Nursing Service, assigned to emergency medical duties in Ashford after the evacuation of wounded personnel from Dunkirk. She wore her gray uniform dress with a red cape and white cap. She was organizing medical supplies when Weber entered carrying boxes of bandages donated by local shops. Their first conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. Weber asked where to place the boxes. Morrison directed him to a storage area. She thanked him. He nodded. Professional. Brief. He noticed her hands. Clean despite hours of work. Efficient movements. No wedding ring. When he left, he did not think about her again. He had other priorities. Over the following 2 weeks, Weber established his routine. Mornings at the church shelter helping organize supplies. Afternoons walking the countryside noting military installations. Evenings in his boarding house room assembling his wireless transmitter. On September 24, he made his first transmission to Hamburg. Location confirmed. Ashford, Kent. RAF Lim Airfield 3 miles south. Observation shows Supermarine Spitfire Squadron based there. Approximately 18 aircraft. More information to follow. Hamburg responded within 8 hours. Message received. Continue observations. Identify bomber squadrons. Priority intelligence required. Weber acknowledged. Over the next 3 weeks he transmitted 7 times. Each message detailed aircraft movements, squadron numbers, airfield locations. He was careful. Brief transmissions. Never from the same location twice. He used a bicycle and rode to different spots in the countryside where he could set up the wireless undetected. During this period, Weber continued volunteering at the church shelter. Morrison was there most days. They began speaking more frequently. Short exchanges about supply logistics, refugee needs, medical requirements. On October 12, they worked together organizing a delivery of blankets from the Women's Voluntary Service. The conversation extended beyond logistics. Morrison asked about his work. Weber recited his cover story. Traveling salesman. Industrial supplies. Business disrupted by the war. She mentioned her family in Edinburgh. Father a doctor. Mother a teacher. 2 younger brothers serving with the army in North Africa. Weber listened carefully. Standard operational practice. Gather personal information. Build trust. Identify vulnerabilities. But he found himself noticing details that were not operationally relevant. The way Morrison tilted her head slightly when concentrating. Her habit of tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The quiet determination in her voice when discussing how to help traumatized children at the shelter. On October 18, Weber transmitted his 9th message to Hamburg. RAF Biggin Hill Major Fighter Station. Observation indicates 72 fighter aircraft including Hurricanes and Spitfires. Anti-aircraft batteries positioned north and east of airfield. Barrage balloon deployment surrounds facility. German intelligence was preparing for a larger offensive. Weber was providing the information they needed. He was performing his duty. The invasion was still coming. Everything was proceeding according to plan. But on October 20, 1940, something happened that Weber had not anticipated. A refugee child, 6 years old, arrived at the shelter with severe burns from an incendiary bomb. Morrison worked for 4 hours stabilizing the boy. Weber assisted, holding supplies, following her instructions without question. When it was over, when the child was sleeping peacefully with bandaged arms and morphine dulling the pain, Morrison sat down on a wooden bench in the hallway. She was shaking. Weber sat beside her. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Then Morrison said quietly, "I can't save them all." Weber did not respond. He had no training for this conversation. But he did not leave either. On October 23, 1940, Weber transmitted his 10th message to Hamburg. Then he did something he had been specifically trained not to do. He stayed in one location too long. Morrison had asked him to help move medical supplies to a storage facility outside town. The work took 3 hours. They talked while loading boxes into a truck. Morrison asked questions about his life in Leeds. Weber answered with his memorized cover story, but he found himself elaborating, adding details that weren't in his briefing, small observations about Yorkshire weather and Leeds architecture that he invented on the spot. During the drive back to Ashford, Morrison mentioned she had Sunday afternoon off duty for the first time in 2 months. Weber, without planning to say it, suggested they walk by the river. Morrison accepted. On October 27, they met at the Stour River path at 2 p.m. The afternoon was cold and bright. They walked for an hour talking about things that had nothing to do with the war. Morrison described growing up in Edinburgh, her years of nursing training, her decision to join the military nursing service. Weber told stories about Leeds that were completely fabricated but felt strangely real as he spoke them. When they returned to town, Morrison said, "Thank you for this. I needed to remember what it feels like to be a person, not just a nurse." Weber understood exactly what she meant. For 3 hours he had not been a spy. He had been William Harris, traveling salesman, walking by a river with a woman who made him forget his mission. It was dangerous. It violated every operational protocol. But he agreed to meet her again the following Sunday. Between October 27 and November 10, Weber and Morrison met 4 more times. Walks along the river. Tea at a small cafe on High Street. Once, they went to the cinema to watch a newsreel and a British propaganda film. Weber sat in the darkened theater watching footage of RAF victories and felt a strange disconnection. These were the aircraft he was reporting on. The pilots being celebrated might die because of intelligence he transmitted to Hamburg. Morrison sat beside him, her shoulder occasionally touching his. She did not know what he was. She could not know. On November 12, Weber transmitted his 14th message. RAF Kenley operational status confirmed. 43 fighter aircraft. Recent reinforcement of 2 squadrons from Scotland. Anti-aircraft defenses increased. Hamburg's response was unusually detailed. Excellent work. Intelligence confirms Luftwaffe targeting of these specific airfields planned for December offensive. Your information critical to mission success. Weber stared at the decoded message for a long time. Critical to mission success. He was helping plan attacks that would kill RAF pilots. Attacks that would kill people Morrison knew. Possibly Morrison herself if the bombing spread. On November 15, Morrison invited Weber to dinner at the boarding house where she was staying. The landlady, Mrs. Patterson, had offered to cook a proper meal for the residents as a morale boost. Weber almost declined. Getting closer to Morrison's personal life increased risk. But he accepted. The dinner was modest. Rationed beef, carrots, potatoes. 4 other boarders attended. Conversation was careful, avoiding discussion of the bombing raids. When dinner ended, Weber and Morrison walked outside into the cold night. Morrison said, "I'm glad you're here. You make things feel normal. Does that make sense?" Weber said, "Yes." They stood in the quiet street for several minutes. Then Morrison kissed him. Brief, gentle. When she pulled away, she looked uncertain, as if she had made a mistake. Weber did not speak. He did not know what to say. Morrison said, "I'm sorry. That was inappropriate. I shouldn't have." Weber kissed her back. Longer. The street was empty. The blackout curtains in surrounding houses kept the darkness complete. After that night, Weber stopped transmitting for 8 days. Hamburg sent 2 inquiries. Request status confirmation. Is your position compromised? Weber did not respond. He told himself he needed to assess operational security. In reality, he was avoiding a decision he knew he would eventually have to make. On November 23, he met Morrison at the church shelter. She was treating a young airman who had been injured during an emergency landing near Ashford. The pilot, 22 years old, had burns on his hands and face. Morrison worked efficiently, cleaning wounds, applying bandages, speaking quietly to keep the airman calm. Weber watched from across the room. The pilot was RAF. Fighter Squadron. Exactly the kind of target Weber was trained to help destroy. Morrison was saving his life. Weber walked outside into the cold afternoon. The cognitive dissonance was becoming unbearable. He was a German intelligence officer. His duty was to his country, to the war effort, to the success of the invasion that would end this conflict. But he was also William Harris now, at least partially. And William Harris was in love with Sarah Morrison. On November 25, Hamburg sent an urgent message. Operational security compromised. Multiple Abwehr agents arrested by MI5 in London and southeast England. Increase surveillance precautions. Continue intelligence gathering. Priority highest level. Weber read the message 3 times. The British counterintelligence net was closing. His operational window was shrinking. He needed to transmit more information or extract himself from England before capture. But extraction meant leaving. Leaving meant abandoning Morrison. The mission had become personal. That was the greatest operational failure possible. On November 28, Weber made a transmission. RAF Hornchurch Squadron rotation identified. 51 fighter aircraft. Observation of pilot training patterns suggests morale high despite losses. Anti-aircraft effectiveness increasing. He sent the message and immediately regretted it. Each piece of intelligence contributed to German targeting. Morrison would be in danger if bombing intensified. The logic was clear. His mission was killing people Morrison cared about. And eventually, possibly Morrison herself. On December 1, Morrison invited Weber to her family's house for Christmas. She had secured leave to visit Edinburgh for 5 days in late December and wanted him to meet her parents. Weber said he would try to arrange it. Inside he knew it was impossible. By December his mission might be complete. By December he might be extracted back to Germany. By December, MI5 might have arrested him. By December Morrison might know what he really was. The relationship had no future. But he could not tell her that. On December 5, Weber stopped transmitting entirely. Hamburg sent increasingly urgent messages. Confirm operational status immediately. Intelligence critical for upcoming offensive. Extraction option available if position compromised. Respond within 48 hours or assume operational failure. Weber did not respond. He was paralyzed. Every choice led to catastrophe. If he continued his mission he would contribute to attacks that might kill Morrison. If he stopped his mission he was betraying Germany, betraying his training, committing treason. If he confessed to Morrison she would report him. If he extracted, he would disappear from her life without explanation. On December 8, Morrison confronted him. They were walking by the river, the same path they had walked on their first afternoon together. Morrison stopped and said, "Something's wrong. You've been distant this week. Tell me what's happening." Weber said nothing was wrong. Morrison did not accept the lie. She said, "I'm a nurse. I'm trained to recognize when people are suffering. You're suffering. If you can't tell me why, at least admit it." Weber almost told her then. The words were in his throat. "I am a German intelligence officer. I am a spy. I've been lying to you since we met. Everything about me is false." But he did not say it. Instead he said, "The war makes everything difficult." Morrison held his hand. She said, "I know. But we have each other. That makes it bearable." Weber realized in that moment that Morrison loved him. Actually loved him. Not William Harris, the cover identity. But the person he had become while pretending to be William Harris. The irony was suffocating. On December 10, Weber made a decision. He would confess. Not to MI5. To Morrison. He would tell her everything and accept whatever consequences followed. If she reported him, so be it. He could not continue the lie. But that night, before he could speak to her, something happened that changed everything again. At 9:30 p.m., the Luftwaffe launched a major bombing raid on London. The bombers flew over Ashford in formation. Morrison and Weber stood outside the church shelter watching the aircraft pass overhead. Hundreds of them. The sky hummed with engine noise. Morrison said quietly, "Those planes will kill people tonight. Families, children, people who have nothing to do with this war." Weber said nothing. Morrison continued, "Sometimes I don't understand how human beings can do this to each other. How do the pilots sleep at night knowing what they're carrying?" Weber felt physically ill. He was helping those pilots. His intelligence made their missions more effective. Morrison was speaking about mass murder, and Weber was an accomplice. That night, Weber did not sleep. He lay in his boarding house bed staring at the ceiling. By morning, he had decided on a different course of action. He would not confess to Morrison. He would not continue his mission for Hamburg. Instead, he would do something that had never been part of his training, never been part of his planning, something that would betray both his country and the woman he loved. He would turn himself into MI5 and offer to become a double agent. On December 12th, Weber walked into the Ashford police station and asked to speak with someone from the security service. The sergeant on duty looked at him suspiciously. Weber said calmly, "I am a German intelligence officer. I wish to surrender." The sergeant's hand moved toward his telephone. Within 30 minutes, 2 MI5 officers arrived. Within 2 hours, Weber was in a secure facility in London being interrogated. He told them everything. His real name. His training. His mission objectives. The wireless codes. His Hamburg contact protocols. Everything except one detail. He did not mention Sarah Morrison. The MI5 interrogation lasted 4 days. The officers were thorough and skeptical. They verified Weber's information against existing intelligence. They cross-referenced his radio transmissions with signals intercepts. They tested his knowledge of Abwehr procedures. On December 16th, the lead interrogator, a major named Robertson, sat down across from Weber and said, "Your information is accurate. We've been tracking your transmissions since October. We allowed you to continue operating to understand your network. Now we need to decide what to do with you." Weber asked what his options were. Robertson said, "Execution for espionage. Or cooperation as a double agent transmitting false intelligence to Hamburg under our control. You get to choose." Weber chose cooperation. Not because he wanted to help Britain. Not because he wanted to damage Germany. But because it meant he could stay in England. Near Morrison. Even if he could never see her again, even if she would never know what happened to him, at least he would be in the same country. But Robertson had one more question. "During your time in Ashford, did you form any personal relationships that might compromise your effectiveness as a double agent?" Weber hesitated. Then he lied. He said no. Robertson studied him for a long moment. Then he said, "Good. Because the operation we're planning requires complete emotional detachment. You'll be transmitting intelligence designed to misdirect German bombing campaigns. If you have any conflicting loyalties, now is the time to declare them." Weber repeated the lie. No conflicting loyalties. He was ready to begin. On December 18, 1940, Hans Friedrich Weber ceased to exist officially. MI5 created a new identity for him within their double agent program, codenamed Operation Garbo initially, though his personal designation would be Agent Henrik. He was moved to a secure house in Hertfordshire under constant supervision. 2 MI5 handlers controlled his every communication with Hamburg. They wrote the messages he transmitted. They dictated the false intelligence he would provide. Weber was no longer a German spy. He was a British asset pretending to be a German spy. The strategy was elegant and brutal. Weber would continue his regular transmissions to Hamburg, but now the information would be carefully crafted to misdirect German military planning. Real intelligence mixed with subtle falsehoods. Accurate reports on insignificant targets. Delayed information on important installations. Fabricated details about troop movements and defensive preparations. The goal was to make Hamburg believe they still had an effective agent in England while actually feeding them data that would cause strategic failures. On December 20th, Weber transmitted his first controlled message. RAF fighter squadrons relocated from southeast England to Scotland for rest and refitting. Ashford area defenses reduced. Opportunity for bombing raid with minimal resistance. The information was completely false. Fighter squadrons remained at full strength in the southeast. But Hamburg believed it. They responded enthusiastically. Excellent intelligence. We'll forward to Luftwaffe planning immediately. 3 days later, on December 23rd, the Luftwaffe launched a major raid on targets in Kent based partially on Weber's false intelligence. The bombers encountered full defensive preparations. RAF fighters shot down 14 German aircraft. Anti-aircraft batteries destroyed 6 more. The raid was a tactical disaster for the Luftwaffe. And Weber had helped cause it. He sat in the safe house listening to BBC radio reports of the German losses and felt nothing. No satisfaction. No guilt. Just emptiness. Meanwhile in Ashford, Sarah Morrison searched for William Harris. He had disappeared without warning. No goodbye. No explanation. His landlady said he had left suddenly, paid through the end of the month, took his belongings. Morrison went to the church shelter hoping he might appear. She waited 3 days. On December 24th, Christmas Eve, she asked the local police if they had any information. The sergeant said no. Traveling salesman come and go. Probably returned to Leeds. Morrison did not believe it. Harris would have told her if he was leaving. They had plans. He was supposed to meet her family in Edinburgh. Something had happened. She wrote to the address he had given her in Leeds. The letter was returned undeliverable. She asked Thompson & Sons, the company Harris claimed to work for. They had no employee by that name. She contacted the Leeds registry office. No record of William Harris born in 1908 matching his description. On January 3, 1941, Morrison went to the Ashford police station again. She told the sergeant she believed something had happened to Harris. Maybe an accident. Maybe something worse. The sergeant took her statement but offered little hope. Wartime made people disappear. Could be anywhere. Could be anything. Morrison insisted. She said Harris was not the kind of man who would vanish without reason. The sergeant asked if she had proof he even existed. She had nothing. No photographs. No letters. Just memories of walks by the river and conversations in church shelters. What Morrison did not know was that MI5 had already constructed a full cover story for Weber's disappearance. Official records showed that William Harris had been arrested in London for black market activity and sentenced to 6 months in prison. The records were false, created to explain his absence if anyone investigated. When Morrison's inquiries reached MI5 through routine police channels, they simply confirmed the cover story. Harris was a criminal. She should forget about him. In the Hertfordshire safe house, Weber learned about Morrison's search through his MI5 handlers. They showed him reports of her police inquiries. Robertson asked if Weber wanted to send her a letter explaining his departure. Weber said no. Any contact would risk exposing the operation. Morrison would be safer believing he was a criminal than knowing the truth. But the real reason Weber refused was simpler. He could not face her. Even in a letter. Even with lies. Because he knew she deserved the truth and he could never give it to her. Through January and February 1941, Weber transmitted 23 controlled messages to Hamburg. Each one a carefully crafted blend of truth and deception. His MI5 handlers were impressed with his technical skill and his apparent commitment to the deception. But they noticed something else. Weber was becoming detached. Going through motions. He transmitted the messages they wrote. He confirmed receipt of Hamburg's responses. But he showed no interest in the content. No curiosity about the strategic impact. He was a mechanism, not an agent. On March 5, 1941, Hamburg sent an unusual message. Your intelligence has been invaluable to operation planning. Recommendation submitted for Iron Cross 2nd class. Congratulations on exceptional service. Weber read the message and felt nothing. A German military decoration for betraying Germany. The irony was too heavy to process. He filed the message in the operational record and went to bed. That night he dreamed about Morrison. In the dream she knew what he was. She looked at him with contempt and walked away. He woke up in cold sweat. In March 1941, Morrison requested transfer from Ashford. Too many memories. Too much pain in familiar places. She was reassigned to a military hospital in Surrey treating wounded soldiers evacuated from North Africa. The work was harder, more demanding, more brutal. But it gave her purpose. She did not think about William Harris every day anymore. Just most days. By April, she had convinced herself he had never really existed. A traveling salesman who lied about everything. Maybe even his name. She had been foolish to trust him. What Morrison did not know was that Weber had asked his MI5 handlers about her twice. Both times they told him she was fine, transferred to another posting, moving on with her life. Both times, Weber accepted the information without asking for details. He did not want to know more. Knowing more would make everything harder. Better to remember her as she was in Ashford. Better to preserve that version of the past before everything collapsed. On May 10, 1941, the Luftwaffe launched its largest bombing raid on London. Over 500 aircraft. The attack killed over 1,400 people and destroyed or damaged thousands of buildings. Weber's false intelligence had contributed to German strategic planning for the raid. Not directly. Not intentionally. But the cumulative effect of his controlled transmissions had shaped Luftwaffe decision-making. Some of the bombers that hit London had been redirected from other targets based on information Weber provided under MI5 direction. When Weber learned the casualty numbers, he asked Robertson a direct question. Am I responsible for those deaths? Robertson said, no. The Germans are responsible. You're helping us save lives by disrupting their planning. Weber said, But without my intelligence, would they have attacked differently? Robertson said, possibly. But that's not the point. The point is we're winning the intelligence war. Your work is shortening this conflict. Weber did not find the answer comforting. Through the summer of 1941, Weber continued his double-agent work. His transmissions became more sophisticated as MI5 refined their deception strategy. They fed Hamburg information about fictional British troop deployments, invented weapons systems, fabricated industrial production figures. Hamburg believed it all. Weber was their most reliable source. They had no idea he had been turned. They promoted him to Hauptmann in absentia, captain, for betraying his country. On August 12, 1941, Morrison wrote a letter to her mother in Edinburgh. In it, she mentioned William Harris for the first time since his disappearance. She wrote, "I met someone in Ashford who I thought might be important. He turned out to be a lie. I am learning that the war teaches us to distrust everything, even our own judgment. I don't know if I will be able to love anyone again. The risk of being wrong is too high." The letter was delivered to Edinburgh 3 days later. Morrison's mother wrote back suggesting she take some leave and come home for a rest. Morrison declined. She preferred to work. In September 1941, Weber asked his MI5 handlers if he could visit Ashford. Just once. To see the town. To see if Morrison was still there. Robertson refused. Too dangerous. If anyone recognized Weber, the entire operation would be compromised. Dozens of other double agents were operating under similar control. If one was exposed, the entire network might collapse. Weber accepted the decision. He did not ask again. But he thought about that river path constantly. The cold afternoon. Morrison's hand in his. The moment before everything became impossible. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. The United States entered the war. Weber transmitted a message to Hamburg assessing British reaction to the American entry. The intelligence was accurate because MI5 wanted Hamburg to trust Weber completely for a larger deception they were planning. Weber wrote the assessment without emotion. American entry would change everything. The war would last longer. More people would die. More cities would burn. And Weber would continue sitting in a safe house in Hertfordshire transmitting lies. In early 1942, MI5 began planning for the most ambitious deception operation of the war. They would use their network of double agents, including Weber, to convince Germany that the Allied invasion of Europe would occur at Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy. The operation would take years to develop. It would require perfect coordination. And it would depend on agents like Weber maintaining credibility with German intelligence throughout the entire war. Robertson explained the plan to Weber in March 1942. Weber asked one question. When will this end? Robertson said, when we win the war. Or when you're no longer useful. Whichever comes first. Weber said, and after that? Robertson said, after that you'll be resettled somewhere with a new identity. You'll never be able to return to Germany. Your family will never know what happened to you. You'll live the rest of your life as someone else. That's the price of survival. Weber nodded. He had already accepted that price. He had been living as someone else since September 1940. The war had just made it permanent. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces invaded Normandy. The deception operation succeeded. German forces expected the invasion at Pas-de-Calais and kept significant reserves away from the actual landing beaches. Weber's controlled transmissions had been part of that success. In the weeks leading up to D-Day, he had transmitted detailed false intelligence about fictional army divisions positioned across from Calais. Hamburg believed him completely. They repositioned their defenses based partly on his reports. When the Allies landed in Normandy, German response was delayed by hours. Those hours saved thousands of Allied lives. But Weber did not celebrate. He sat in his safe house and calculated. He had transmitted false intelligence that saved Allied soldiers. But those same transmissions, designed to build his credibility, had also provided accurate information that helped German military planning earlier in the war. How many British airmen had died because of his early reports on RAF positions? How many civilians had been killed in bombing raids that his intelligence helped facilitate? Was he a hero or a murderer? The question had no answer. He was both. Or neither. Just a man who had chosen one impossible path over another. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. Weber received the news in his Hertfordshire safe house from Robertson, who arrived with a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. Robertson said, "We won. You helped us win." The deception operation was critical to Allied success. Weber said, "Did Morrison survive?" Robertson looked confused. Weber said, "Sarah Morrison. Nurse. I met her in Ashford in 1940. Robertson said, "I'll check the records." 3 days later, Robertson returned with information. Morrison had survived the war. She had been transferred multiple times, serving in military hospitals in England, North Africa and France after the Normandy invasion. She had been mentioned in dispatches twice for exceptional service under fire. She was currently stationed at a convalescent facility in Hampshire treating wounded soldiers awaiting demobilization. She was alive. She was safe. Weber asked if he could see her. Robertson said no. The operation was over, but Weber's identity was still classified. He could never contact anyone from his previous life as William Harris. On June 15, 1945, Weber was officially debriefed. MI5 documented his entire operation, his transmissions, his contributions to the deception campaign, his role in Allied intelligence success. They offered him British citizenship under his new identity, a pension and resettlement assistance. They also offered him a position with British intelligence if he wanted to continue working. Weber declined. He asked only one thing. He wanted to see Morrison once. Not speak to her. Just see her. To know she was real. To know she had survived. Robertson considered the request for 3 days. Finally, he agreed under strict conditions. Weber would be escorted. He would observe from a distance. He would not approach. He would not make contact. If he violated these conditions, he would be arrested and charged with security violations. Weber accepted. On June 25, 1945, an MI5 officer drove Weber to the convalescent facility in Hampshire. They parked across the street from the main building. Weber sat in the car watching the entrance. At 3:30 p.m., Morrison emerged from the building. She wore her nursing uniform. Her hair was shorter than Weber remembered, pulled back efficiently. She looked tired but composed. She walked to a bench in the hospital grounds and sat down. She opened a book and began reading. Weber watched her for 20 minutes. She did not look up. She did not know he was there. After 20 minutes, the MI5 officer said quietly, "Time to go." Weber nodded. They drove away. He did not look back. On July 1, 1945, Weber was resettled in Manchester under the identity of Henry Watson, a civil servant with the Ministry of Labour. MI5 provided him with complete documentation, a residence and employment. He was instructed to live quietly, avoid attention, never discuss his wartime activities. He followed the instructions perfectly. He got a small flat near the city center. He went to work every day. He came home every evening. He did not make friends. He did not form relationships. He existed. In August 1945, Morrison returned to Edinburgh on extended leave. She had been away from home for 5 years. Her parents had aged visibly. Her brothers had both survived the war, but one had been seriously wounded and would never fully recover. Edinburgh felt strange after so long away. Too quiet. Too normal. Morrison spent 2 weeks at home, then requested reassignment. The nursing service placed her at the Edinburgh Royal Infirmary. She worked in surgical wards treating civilian patients. The work was familiar but different. No bomb casualties. No emergency amputations. Just ordinary illness and injury. It felt surreal. In September 1945, Morrison went for a walk by the water of Leith on a Sunday afternoon. The path reminded her of the Stour River in Ashford. She thought about William Harris for the first time in months. She wondered where he was. If he had survived the war. If he ever thought about her. She concluded he probably did not. People like Harris moved through the world leaving no trace. She had been one of many encounters in his life. Probably meaningless to him. Probably forgotten already. She was wrong, but she would never know that. Through 1946 and 1947, Weber continued his quiet existence in Manchester. He worked. He slept. He read newspapers. He followed the reconstruction of Europe with detached interest. He saw photographs of ruined German cities and felt nothing. He read about war crimes trials and felt nothing. He learned that the Abwehr had been dissolved and its records captured by the Allies. His real identity, Hans Friedrich Weber, was listed among agents who had operated in England. Status unknown. Presumed captured or killed. His family in Germany believed he was dead. It was simpler that way. In 1948, Morrison met a doctor named Robert Campbell at the Edinburgh Royal Infirmary. Campbell was kind, steady, unexciting. He asked her to dinner. She accepted. They began seeing each other regularly. He proposed in March 1949. Morrison said yes. Not because she loved him the way she had loved William Harris. But because she liked him, trusted him, and wanted to build a normal life. Campbell never asked about her wartime experiences in detail. Morrison never volunteered the information. They married in June 1949 in a small ceremony. Morrison's parents attended. Her brothers attended. 40 guests. Quiet celebration. New beginning. In 1950, Weber received a letter from MI5. It was brief. Your wartime service is now declassified within government records but remains protected by the Official Secrets Act. You may not discuss your activities with anyone outside authorized channels. Your pension will continue. A contact number is provided if you require assistance. That was all. No commendation. No recognition. Just confirmation that his secret would remain secret. Weber burned the letter in his fireplace and continued his quiet life. In 1953, Weber learned through a newspaper announcement that Sarah Morrison had given birth to a daughter. The notice was in the Edinburgh Evening News, which Weber had been receiving by mail subscription since 1947 for reasons he never examined too closely. Morrison, Sarah Catherine née Morrison and husband Robert Campbell announced the birth of their daughter, Margaret Ann, on April 12, 1953. Mother and child well. Weber cut out the announcement and kept it in a drawer. In 1960, Weber was walking through Manchester city centre when he saw a woman who looked like Morrison. Older. Grey in her hair. But the same posture, the same efficient walk. Weber stopped breathing. The woman walked past him. She did not look at him. She continued down the street and disappeared into a shop. Weber stood frozen for several minutes. Then he walked home. It was not her. Could not have been her. Morrison lived in Edinburgh. Manchester was 200 miles away. But Weber spent the next week unable to sleep. Seeing ghosts. In 1964, Weber was diagnosed with lung cancer. Inoperable. The doctor gave him 6 to 12 months. Weber accepted the diagnosis calmly. He asked the doctor to notify MI5 of his condition so they could prepare for his death and the handling of classified materials. The doctor seemed confused but agreed. Weber went home and wrote a single letter. He addressed it to Sarah Morrison, now Campbell, in Edinburgh. He did not mail it. He could not mail it. But he wrote it anyway. The letter said, "I do not expect you to remember me. William Harris, Ashford. 1940, I disappeared without explanation. You deserve to know why, but I cannot tell you. Not even now. Not even dying. What I can tell you is this: I was not what you thought I was. I was worse than you imagined. But the time I spent with you was the only time in my life I was real. Everything else was performance, duty, necessity. Those Sunday afternoons by the river, that was truth. The rest was lies. I am sorry for the deception. I'm sorry for the pain. I'm sorry I could not be the person you believed I was. I hope your life has been good. I hope you found happiness I could not give you. Thank you for making me believe, even briefly, that I could be someone better than what I was." Weber burned the letter. He never sent it. Morrison never knew he had written it. In March 1965, Henry Watson, formerly Hans Friedrich Weber, died in a Manchester hospital. His MI5 file was sealed for 75 years. No obituary was published. No funeral was held. The civil service processed his pension termination. His flat was cleared. His belongings were disposed of. He disappeared as completely in death as he had disappeared in 1940. No trace remained except classified documents in government archives that no one would read for decades. On April 3, 1965, Sarah Campbell, formerly Morrison, was working at the Edinburgh Royal Infirmary when she received a phone call from the Ministry of Defence. They asked if she had known a man named William Harris in 1940. Morrison said yes. What? The official said they were closing files on wartime personnel. Had Harris ever contacted her after December 1940? Morrison said no. Never. The official thanked her and hung up. Morrison stood holding the phone for several minutes. Then she went back to work. That evening she thought about the Stour River path. The cold afternoon. The moment when everything seemed possible. Then she put the memory away again. Some doors stay closed. In 1985, Morrison died of heart failure at age 73. Her husband Robert had died 2 years earlier. Their daughter Margaret attended the funeral with her own children. Morrison's brothers, both elderly now, attended. 40 people. Quiet service. Life completed. In Morrison's personal effects, Margaret found a single photograph. A church shelter in Ashford. Refugees and volunteers. Morrison in her nursing uniform. And in the background, partly visible, a man in civilian clothes carrying boxes of supplies. Margaret did not recognize him. No one else did either. The photograph was filed away with other family memorabilia. In 2020, MI5 declassified Hans Friedrich Weber's operational file as part of routine document release. Historians discovered his story. The German spy who turned double agent. His role in the D-Day deception. His contributions to Allied intelligence success. Academic papers were written. His operational record was analyzed. His transmissions were studied. But one detail was never discovered because Weber had protected it successfully for his entire life. Sarah Morrison. The British nurse who had no idea she had loved a German spy. Who never learned that William Harris was really Hans Friedrich Weber. Who never knew that her kindness had changed the course of a man's war, though not the course of the war itself. And perhaps that is the real story. Not the espionage. Not the deception operation. Not the intelligence success. But the fact that in the middle of a war designed to erase individual humanity, two people found each other briefly and were changed by it. Weber betrayed his country. Morrison never learned the truth. Both of them spent the rest of their lives carrying the weight of something they could never discuss. Some secrets stay buried. Some loves remain unresolved. War makes that inevitable. The Stour River path in Ashford still exists. On cold Sunday afternoons when the light is right, it looks exactly as it did in October 1940. The water flows the same. The grass bends in the same wind. Nothing remains of what happened there except memory. And even memory fades. In the end, all that persists is the simple fact. They walked there together once when everything seemed possible before the truth made everything impossible.